Hi, I'm here with Oonagh Cousins. She's with the campaign there for ME, and we're discussing the new UK ME delivery plan, which has gotten pretty negative reviews across the board as being a lot of noise or words and not much meat. So, Oonagh, why don't you tell us what your impressions were?
Yeah, I mean, I think you summarized it pretty well. Very, very disappointing, basically, not going to address the issues that we face. There were some
More? You expecting more?
no, not really. I think we saw this coming, but it was still it's still bleak, like watching it play out and seeing it published.
So let's go over some of the components that you're unhappy with, or that people are generally unhappy with. I think one is research, not much funding or very little funding. Um,
Yeah, yeah. So like fundamentally, the biggest thing I think most patients want is biomedical research into understanding the disease and ultimately treatments. And yeah, this doesn't provide that. What they did provide was these like 200K grants on like repurposed medication, which is positive. I think there are things that you could do with that, but again, it doesn't really address the root cause.
£200,000 is nothing. I mean, that's really
Yes, exactly. Yeah, it's nothing. And then there was they talked about the Heritage and Prime, these two other research projects, but those were like developed independently of the plan, and again, not biomedical research. They're kind of it's healthcare services, not also looking at the overlap between long COVID, which all these things are positive, but not enough, basically, not going to address the real root cause of the problem.
so. What besides the research? How about in the area of the treatment? It doesn't seem like they really make an effort to make sure that the NICE guidelines are implemented everywhere.
Yeah, so when it comes to the people know, like as everyone in the ME community knows that healthcare for people with ME is dreadful. And one of the big obstacles we face is just this kind of opposition to the new NICE guidelines, and they haven't addressed that. They there are these e-learning modules, but who's accountable for making sure that they are like being used is not clear. And what you really need is you need some national oversight. It's very like they've kind of they've what's it called delegated it to the kind of local. They're hoping for the best. The ICBs are going to implement this, but that's just not going to be enough. It's not going to address the issue. We need national oversight, and we need transparency around like are the ME clinics being improved? Do we like we need there needs to be accountability around it, because otherwise you can just get away with not doing it, basically.
So what is it that they're calling for? I mean, how do you see it?
The plan,
Yeah.
I think they recognize the issue, and they know that that the healthcare professionals and the medical profession needs to be retrained, but they don't like actually put in the actionable steps in order to do that, basically. Like the e-learning module is not going to be sufficient, basically. So they've acknowledged the issue, which is a positive, but they haven't the steps aren't enough to
And
solve
they
it.
basically said this is an important issue and has to be
Yeah.
addressed. Okay.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
I guess one could say that's something.
Yes, it's something, and it is, that kind of formal recognition is a step, right? Like before, there wasn't even acknowledgement that this was a problem, and so from an advocacy perspective, that is something you can use to hold to the government to account. Like I generally feel like the government hasn't been under much pressure to do much around this, and that's part of the reason you see this plan be so disappointing, is that it can get away with not putting money behind it. The purse strings are tight in the UK right now.
Mm.
Like they will try to get away with not giving money, and if they think that they can get away with it without too much negative press, then they probably will do that.
Hmm. So what else about the plan? Are there other aspects of the plan that you don't like? I know that there was sort of a list of things putting you on the spot here.
Yeah. So what have we talked about? We talked about the lack of research. We've talked about we talked a bit about healthcare and kind of the lack of education, like lack of insufficient measures to address the need to retrain the workforce. There's also the specialist service. So again, they've talked about that and they know there's a need, but they haven't committed to anything, and they've put that decision in the hands of Wes Streeting, and so ultimately it's going to be a political decision rather than like a kind of medical decision
And
or a
this is
health
this
decision.
specialty care for severe, for
Yeah, special service for very severe cases, which is a positive step, but ultimately they've deferred committing to anything on that. So, and they haven't, there's no way to hold them to account for that. So again, yeah, it's really disappointing.
so basically they recognize they acknowledge the need that there are these severe cases and they acknowledge
Yeah.
the need for care, but they don't actually do much to provide that care.
Yes, exactly. And again, in the forward, Ashley Dalton talks about patient safety and the fact that people have died and that these should become never events. Like
This
that's
one by Ashley Dalton is the
she's the minister. I don't know her official title, but she's the minister one below Wes Streeting, who's this is her what she's responsible for this side of things. So she's responsible for the plan ultimately. And she talks about it at the beginning and the forward. Like they know that people with ME are dying because of the lack of care, right? So they know that they've talked about that, but they haven't put in measures that's actually going to change that in that reality, basically.
So do you think that this plan has any immediate impact at all, or what happens going forward, and what happens with everybody who's worked on the plan and was putting time and effort into it?
Yeah, it's very disappointing in that regard because I know a lot of, like there was a big consultation, a lot of people put a lot of hours in. What happens? So not totally clear to be honest, but they have committed to keeping the task and finish group going, and so it moves to the implementation phase, so that there is still opportunity to lobby and to work with the DHSE on this. It's not like now it's all over. There will be opportunities to push for the things that they've committed to and making sure that they do those things that will still be in the future. Um, but ultimately, I think we really need a big shift in how much pressure they're under to do something about this. Right now, this is small fry for the government, and they're just not giving it the attention or the resources it needs. And to make that shift, I personally think it needs to come from you know a lot of negative publicity basically that really shines a light on the failures and the systemic failures. Right now it's not something that the government's really feeling the pressure on.
Do you think that the government has noticed the response to this plan, or have they responded in any way, or are they just kind of not really?
So I haven't seen any response that I'm aware of, but I do think it was noticeable how negative the response has been, and I think that is the start of a shift. I think that's one silver lining that we've seen, is that the kind of powerful negative response. It was Channel 4, BBC Breakfast, in the Times. Those are big outlets. BBC Radio 4, World at One. I think there was people were doing some brilliant interviews, and
Including Sean O'Neill, uh,
yes, Sean O'Neill. Yeah, yeah.
his
Sarah
mom.
Boothby, Karen Hargrave, Benita, Charles Shepherd. Yeah, some really brilliant interviews, and I think that's a shift. And I think it was making the government look bad, which I don't think that they've really felt before on the ME side of things. So I think that is a small positive to hold on to.
Do you think I mean, obviously, I guess, how much do you attribute some of what's going on, even this minimal amount in this plan, to a lot of the attention around Mae Boothby O'Neill's death and the inquest that seems to have pushed things forward to a certain extent, or at least created an awareness of the need for urgency, even if it hasn't created the urgency itself?
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult to say, but my instinct and my feeling is that is part of the reason we've seen. If there's anything positive coming out of the plan, I do think part of the reason is because of that, and that momentum shift. It has centered around what, Maeve's story being in the news. I do think there's something in that. Yeah.
Mhm. So what do you hope for going forward? I mean, I gather the community is quite disappointed. What happens with that disappointment? Do you suggest people kind of cope with that?
Yeah, it's difficult to say. The ME community has dealt with decades of disappointment. I do think. is incredibly disappointing, but it is a little bit of progress. And I do think progress is possible. And I think we have like with the new NICE guidelines, with some of this momentum around, like the press is starting to pick up on this a bit. We're starting to build a new narrative around ME, and I think that's really fundamental to making progress. And I think we've just got to keep chipping away at that. And it's difficult to say exactly what will break the dam. Like that's the thing with advocacy. It's not like you can say this will be it, but you don't. You just have to keep going, and then the tide turns. You know, you have to. It's like chipping away until suddenly the dam breaks. And I think we've just got to hold on to that. We are making progress. I think there's a bit of positive stuff in the plan. There's a lot of negative media coverage. The NICE guidelines have changed. There's a growing awareness that there are systemic failures. I think we can do it, but yeah.
More has to be done. What do you feel
Yeah.
about, I mean, your case of ME when you were diagnosed was from having had a COVID exposure,
Mhm.
infection. What degree do you think the long COVID situation has pushed this forward as well?
Yeah, I think it's really tricky because the thing is with the long COVID stuff, like people weren't really talking about the fact that a lot of long COVID is ME. It's only really recently that we've been like joining those dots. And so I think it's given it some credibility and legitimacy amongst some scientists and some doctors. But in some ways, I'm more frustrated than anything, really, because I feel like it was a bit of a lost opportunity. It could have been from the start, like, look, this virus is causing vast numbers of people with ME.
Mm.
And it could have I think if those dots had been joined earlier, when people were still talking about the pandemic and it was still in the news and it wasn't this completely taboo topic, that narrative could have been stronger and we could have joined those dots because there's a lot of stigma against long COVID, but it's not as bad as ME. And I think long COVID could have brought ME along a bit, but now we're at this phase where like people just like don't want to talk about the pandemic at all, and so long COVID's not really in the news at all anymore. So like I think in some ways it's helped, but in other ways I feel like a bit of a lost opportunity, to be honest. I think that the fate of both sets of patients that are overlapping obviously are completely entwined. Like I don't think we can solve long COVID without solving ME. I don't think we can solve ME without solving long COVID. Like when you present the doctors with ME long COVID type symptoms, like at the moment, most of them still think that maybe some graded exercise therapy is going to help you. So the kind of unlearning of what the long-term consequences of an infection are, like the doctors unlearning that is going to be critical for both sets of patients. So the both sets of patients need to work together. Even if you're someone with long COVID who doesn't have ME. Yeah, so I have really mixed feelings, and yeah, I think we could have done a lot more earlier, personally.
It's always hindsight. I wonder if that's
Yeah.
somewhat in the US because it does seem like there was, I sort of had the sense earlier on that there was an understanding of the connection between the two, but I think historians will have to go back and see what
Yeah.
happened. Did you want to say something else?
No, I was just thinking, yeah, I think it's hard to pin down exactly what, like some people were making the connection, but the media wasn't making that connection. Like no one, when I was being interviewed in 2020, no one was talking about ME with
Mm.
me, for example. And I remember being interviewed and they were asking me, well, like, are you surprised that there's no medical care? And I didn't really know about ME, but my friend had glandular fever and had been long-term sick, and we didn't call it ME, but she had ME. And so I was like not surprised at all that there was no medical care for me. So I remember sitting in front of interviewers and being like, don't you guys know that there's no medical care for long-term infections of long-term consequences of viral infections? And like I think if we join those dots that like we don't understand the long-term causes of infections from the beginning, that narrative would be much more powerful. And like now, because the narrative is that long COVID is over, it feels like people are like it doesn't matter anymore. But actually, the long COVID it's shone this light on this blind spot in medicine. And if we had told that story, then it's much more obvious why you need to fix long COVID, because it's like this wider problem. But we're now playing catch up with that story, and it's much harder to play catch up with this story now that everybody's desperate to move on. But if we'd made that point from the beginning, yeah, that's what I'm trying to say. If we'd made that point from the beginning, I think our advocacy and our ability to make progress for both of these conditions would have been easier.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Una. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Okay.